I left right out. It's been a little bit. Um, but there's been a lot of things happening that I haven't been able to comment on. I've been so busy. But with some things, I have gotten right again. And granted, we'll go with the market, what I have gotten wrong. The market's gone up significantly. It's rallied back. Overall, like I said, the macro level thing, I'm dead on. The trading side of things, I've been off and I've had to roll some of my shorts into longer term short plays, and I'm kind of just playing it that way now. What I've gotten right though, and we want to talk about one, we'll start with the Nord Stream thing because that's the first thing that happened. Nord Stream 2, the bombing. Remember, if you have listened to me at all in the past when that happened, we went over and I brought up some other people that were thinking the same thing, the capabilities, military capabilities, who was able to actually do that. One, I said, with all the money that's being piled in the Ukraine, they could possibly do that by hiring somebody or by, whatever the case may be, funding it somehow. But even then, the technological capabilities may not be actually out there. Two, the only ones that have practiced this, do this on a consistent basis, is the U.S. military for the most part, and have the capabilities. And so we said that, and that's exactly what this journalist who has been known for dropping bombshell stories, who actually still does journalism. She'll get into that a little bit. But he, according to him and his sources, it was planned, and you can look at all the videotapes before this, and it was planned by the most nefarious characters, the people that have been involved in Ukraine instability since 2000 whatever 14, since the Maidan coup. Before that, Victoria Nuland's the one that always pops in my head. It just because of her, I don't know why her name always stays with me, and maybe it's that testimony with, I think it was Marco Rubio, where she kind of admits that there's biological whatever testing facilities there, and then says it's probably the Russians that are gonna commit the attack. But anyway, so these people had planned this. They knew that it was highly suspicious, or at least illegal. They knew that they couldn't get caught. They did it anyway. And then if you just use common logic to come up with a conclusion or a hypothesis, the U.S. military did it, or somehow NATO members did it, then you were a Russian misinformation agent or whatever, even though it didn't make any sense that their story that the Russians did it. Because why would Russia cut off one of the things that allows them to manipulate and control the very people that, these countries that control a whole entire entity that wants to destroy them, that they're adversarial, or they have an adversarial relationship with. If they can control one of the biggest members, the most, economically, the biggest economic driver within that organization, Germany, and some other countries, then why wouldn't they not do that and then also gain economic benefits just from selling their natural gas? Didn't make any sense. There's no motive there. But there is a motive for us and other Western countries to cut that off, to make sure that Germany and various other nations around there aren't beholden to cheap Russian energy. You just use common logic, makes sense. So we don't need to go into the capabilities. It's been all over the news for a little while. Well, granted, today it seems like to be gone, even though it was one of the big stories, I think, in a long time. I can't find it hardly anywhere. It's kind of out of the, now we got these balloon UFO things that turn more than likely just, not UFOs. They're shot down at whatever, $800,000 a piece. We're shooting sidewire missiles at potential balloons. It doesn't make any, that is just asinine. I don't know if it doesn't make sense, but it doesn't make sense in the realm that there's something else to it. It doesn't make sense into the fact that people cannot use the right weapon for the right tool, or just the most economical weapon. They're just blowing money in the Pentagon. You give them an $800 billion budget, they can't control the skies, and they blow millions of dollars in munitions to shoot down balloons and other probably arts and crafts stuff that's floating around in the atmosphere. Maybe there was a UFO, who knows? I don't really care at this point. There's a lot that the government doesn't tell us, but I do care about them wasting munitions. Why? And that's the only thing that would be suspicious to me is now I think they just came out with it as we speak this morning, that those probably weren't UFOs, or they're probably like, I think you say car lot balloons. That doesn't make any sense too, because as you get in the atmosphere, that sometimes those pop. But anyway, whatever they were, it doesn't make any sense to throw $400,000 sidewire missiles at them, and then that's just the missile systems, and then the fuel that you put in that cost is well over $1 million to shoot some of these things down, because I think one of them they missed a missile, so it's like 800,000. That's I'm going into a whole nother argument there. But anyway, the Nord Stream 2 thing is potentially game changing. It's incredibly blatant. It also went without the authorization of Congress, apparently, because a lot of the members in Congress had no idea this was happening, and potentially spark that kind of action is adversarial. That is a wartime action. But let's go into that journalist. That journalist is being attacked, even though he's done great work in the past. But what it has brought to light to me, and I think he even mentioned it, responding to his attacks, is it doesn't brought to light. I've known this. I've known this for a while, but it just reaffirms what my suspicions of the fact that the actual media that most of us consume, that's easily available, doesn't really have real journalism in it. They just parrot what is given to them in stories. And in fact, they compete with just to get the talking points from various entities, as opposed to before, and what this guy is doing, getting sources within those groups, not the official narrative, but getting sources that have, the behind the scenes, they're interacting with the actual story and getting that story out to the public, shedding the light on what goes on behind the doors, real journalism, investigative journalism, as opposed to, just regurgitating talking points, which we can argue about. Is Operation Mockingbird still in place? I didn't talk about the Twitter files very much, but that is enlightening to the fact of that. And you can extrapolate that over various other media organizations, what has gone on in Twitter. And and we've known that these operations have been set forth in the past, and there's no reason they wouldn't be today. In fact, the evidence, or what we see from this side of things, would lead you to believe that they are advanced in those operative capabilities, and are now utilizing the mainstream media, whatever the soup du jour term of the day, as propaganda tools to get you to think in one box or the other. I could say that maybe you get a little bit of the truth from like a Tucker Carlson, which I've always been skeptical of that guy, but apparently starting to at least see the value in some of his stories. But there was a day when he was with CNN in his little bow tie that I'm always skeptical of that guy. But I see like guys like Mark Levin, like I've talked about him in the past. I've talked about Sean Hannity. These guys are box keepers. They keep you in a box, and there are certain things that they're allowed to talk about that keep you separated from the other box. But then there's certain things that converge. And like the other day, sometimes I pop them on. I know I'm in a whole nother story here, or I guess it's kind of parallel with it. It overlaps with this Nord Stream 2 thing. But Mark Levin over there, war banging his head, head banger. That's Michael Savage's term for Hannity. But Levin is banging his head, pushing this Ukrainian thing. Like if we stop supporting Ukraine now, that Russia's going to take Poland or some shit like that. Russia doesn't want to do that. Listen to what Putin has to actually say. Listen to why he's there in Ukraine. And you can hash out whether the Yahtzee thing is as bad as he portrays it. But there are things that were happening in Ukraine that caused him to take these actions. And if guys like Levin or whatever are really concerned with stopping World War III, instead of setting it off and saying that they're trying to stop it, they would be pushing the diplomatic solution first. And nobody here, in fact, the U.S. has stopped the diplomatic solution a number of times, instead of, bringing Putin or various envoys to the table and actually putting a good faith effort into negotiating a peace. They haven't done anything. In fact, this is like a money grab for many of elites or these contractors. I mean, think about all the billions of dollars that are being poured in, all the weapon systems that are being thrown at the Ukrainians, and now showing up in Africa and various other places. But all the weapon systems, all the money, and it's all up for grabs, essentially. I wonder, since there's no real, you know, chain of custody of this stuff, like how much of this is going to yachts, to whatever beachside properties, islands, how many terrorist organizations, like we're seeing in Africa, some of these separatist rebel groups that are getting hold of some of these sophisticated U.S. military weapon systems. And then now they're talking about giving them tanks and light armored vehicles, which I could care less about those. Right now in the military, in the last few years, there's been, especially in the Marine Corps, this realignment in the going away from their heavy armor, which we can argue that's a whole nother tactical, strategic level type debate. But I could care less about that, but I care more about where those weapon systems, what hands they get into. So if we're giving, like some of the talk was giving them M1 Bradley, or Bradley fighting vehicles and M1 Abrams tanks, it seems pretty asinine to me. I don't want to give them shit. I want to talk peace. In fact, like I've talked about in the past, when you give them these weapon systems end up inevitably getting in the hands of the Russians and to other nations. I mean, you talk about reverse engineering, finding strengths and weaknesses within these things that they probably already have, but it gives them hands-on and the ability to actually go through something physically instead of just gathering intel from other sources. The other aspect of this with Nord Stream 2 and with the weapons systems that are being poured in and going down with the propaganda, where our mainstream media is portraying the Mark Levin types when it comes to this story. Now, overall, I guess my overall point was the mainstream media is a big propaganda tool, influenced by intelligence agencies, whether DNI, whether CIA, the various groups, NSA, FBI. They do their bidding. That's why it's important that you get information elsewhere. But the other thing about this, from a larger macro level, when we're doing these things, there's unintended consequences. When you have like a Russia, where now we're, instead of finding a diplomatic solution, instead of rekindling those ties together, stopping the bloodshed and bringing Russia back into the fold of trade and whatnot, we've pushed them away. And we haven't isolated them like people say, and we haven't destroyed their military like the West tends to believe. I don't know why they believe that. In fact, excuse me, I was just reading an article about Russia actually collaborating with India and upgrading their tanks, their tank fleet. We'll call it a fleet or whatever, but their tanks. And if they're so hurting for military supplies and whatnot, why would they be giving India tanks and revitalizing their military? The ties with India and Russia are pretty interesting, because you think about the adversarial role that India and China have had, especially militarily along some of the border, and we pushed India into kind of China's arms a little bit. They've, even though there's still some tension there, they seem to be playing a little bit together, a little bit better. But India is definitely securing relationships with Russia. Russia's securing relationships with China. All of them are securing relationships with Saudi Arabia, which lends itself to putting forth this huge industrial resource rich collaborative brick of nations. Just there, I'm not even talking about Brazil and all those other places. I'm talking about just in that region. You're talking about over half the population of the world, or roughly, and a lot of the resources and a lot of the land mass and significant military capabilities, and growing military capabilities. It's pretty alarming when you look at it from that kind of level. And I don't think it doesn't appear to me that we have those type of thinkers anymore at a high level in the Pentagon, that we've pretty much wiped those type of individuals out that are able to delve into these topics and look at it from the second, third level order of events and what's going to happen down the line with these decisions, and as opposed to the short-term political or enriching themselves at this point. In my opinion, a lot of them are enriching themselves and waiting for the next thing after. They think that today is going to be the same as tomorrow, or tomorrow's going to be the same as today. And as long as they get the bag and they can get out, they can live high on the hog. Or some of them just, I don't know what else to say. That it's just, I'm just reading the tea leaves as I see them, how these people are so corrupt. I don't know what exactly their motivations are. I can just see what is happening. But anyway, I went off on a total rabbit hole. Nord Stream 2 called that one. Twitter files, all that called that one too, but specifically Nord Stream 2 when we're talking about this event. We knew what the capability was. It was just logical. But it's funny how that story has kind of went away with the UFO thing. Not to say that there isn't some sort of UFOs out there, but it's funny that the U.S. government now is ascertaining this as a possible explanation for certain things that are, whereas in the past they've always denied the existence of these things. But in the last 10 years, it seems as though there's been that disclosure that everybody seems to talk about, that these things exist, and I don't believe they're extraterrestrial. I mean, they're more interdimensional, if anything. But if they're not ours, I mean, some of the videos I've seen, I could see like there's some that are unexplainable. But I've watched some videos that people are posting recently, and I can actually see strobe lights. And if you're not familiar with most of the all of our aircraft have strobe lights, and they're the little flashing lights. In fact, I used to work on the power supplies for those and some of the lights when I was enlisted. So that's like a telltale sign to me that it's, if anything, it's our equipment. Not to downplay some of the other stories, but I'm always leery when the government itself allows some people like that. That dude had his own History Channel show that supposedly ran the UTEP thing. All of a sudden, he's allowed to talk, and then some of these other guys are allowed to talk and say these things as before when they weren't, or they were like commonly, thrown under the bus or disinformation campaigns against them. But all of a sudden, they can talk and they can have their own TV shows and they can come out with all this information. Something's fishy. I mean, do I know exactly what it is right now? I don't know. I have my own hypotheses or theories, but it's definitely fishy. I don't understand why you can just, like, the government does a 180 and allows every swinger in town to start talking about UFOs and their experience within government roles in this field. Anyway, I'll leave it there because I've gone down enough rabbit holes. I'm way off topic on a lot of things. Like I said, the market has been a lot more resilient. Still, macro level, we're right on. I'm 99.9% sure of that. And we're playing on the short side on the long term, trading around in the short term, getting those yields while we can, diversifying into hard assets, paying down whatever debt we can, and then personal growth. Peace.